Alright guys, Red here. Today we're going to be looking at the binds for Star Citizen. We're going to pick out some priority binds that would be very useful for you if you're just starting the game, and then maybe like a secondary tier that would also be pretty useful, and then a third tier that would be good to have. I'm going to do an explanation for most of them as well. So you're going to want to come to keybinds. Now for most of this, if you're using mouse and keyboard or a HOTAS, it's not going to make the slightest bit of difference. I'm not really going to be telling you specifically what keys are bound to what, I'm going to be telling you what binds do. So let me just go into HOTAS and scroll to the top. Vehicles, seats and operator modes, okay. So eject, that's pretty obvious. Look behind, that's pretty useful. I'd put that tier 2, basically just a rear view camera. Mining mode toggle, if you're going to be mining, then that's going to be useful. Tier 2. Scanning mode, this is useful if you're looking to gain some intel on like enemy targets without entering their radar range. So you can sit at a distance and scan your target, figure out what kind of ship it is, and a lot of other details as well. It's also useful for scanning asteroids from a distance for mining purposes. The quantum travel system, that's obviously a tier 1 priority. Get that on something, and this just enables the system. It doesn't activate travel anywhere, just brings the system online, starts spooling up the drive or whatever. Missile operator mode, that's another tier 1 necessity. And again, this doesn't fire any missiles, it just brings the missile systems online. Vehicle cockpit self-destruct can be very useful. I would put it good to have, tier 3. Flight systems ready. This is a tier 1 priority. It brings all your interfaces online and lights up all your MFDs and brings all your ship systems online. Open and close all doors. This is pretty useful. I'd definitely put it in tier 3, but it's useful if you're dropping people off, picking people up, you know, just as a remote control for all the doors on your ship, external doors, but not that necessary. Lock and unlock all doors, this is the same as above, it's good to have, definitely tier 3, and some of the times it doesn't even work anyway. In fact, while we're on this, you should probably know that you're pretty much the only person that can open your doors anyway at the moment in the current build, 3.17.2. If another player comes up to your ship, they can't operate the door controls. So this is a bit redundant. It would be good if it locked all the interior doors, sealing off the bridge or something. There might be 1 or 2 ships that actually works in, but there's not a lot of them. Vehicles view. So this is for your external camera. If you want to go into third person on your ship, this will spin the camera horizontal, vertically, and this will go from cockpit to external camera. This is a zoom. So none of these are really that necessary. Although for landing and stuff, the cockpit view isn't great and there's no external cameras to help with that, so you might want to set some of this up. I'd maybe put this tier 2 if you've got the binds and the controls for it. Flight movement, that's all pretty obvious stuff. Pitch, yaw, roll, you're going to need all that. Strafe up and down, strafe left and right. You can set this up any way you like, depending on what keys you have available. Decoupled mode. We went over this in the last video. Decoupled means that if you put in forward thrust and then take that thrust away, you will keep drifting or you won't keep drifting. If you're coupled, your ship will come to a stop on its own when you take your foot off the throttle or hand off the throttle or whatever. If you're uncoupled, you'll just keep drifting in whatever direction you were going. So I would put this tier 2, it can be really good for doing bounties and stuff, and if you're racing you're going to need this. It's not essential though, and it can come later in the experience. Once you get really good at flying, this can come in really handy, and it's a more rewarding way to fly once you get used to it. Boost, that's pretty much essential, tier 1. Speed limiter, this is also tier 1. You're going to need a bind for these two, or an axis. This basically caps your top speed, and it's very useful for making sure you don't go too fast in a combat situation, so you've got maximum manoeuvrability, and coming in for landing and takeoff and things like that. The last thing you want is to be up at full uncapped speed when you try and take off in a hangar, because chances are you're going straight into the roof. I use this all the time, and it's great for giving me more control over whatever situation I find myself in. You can add a toggle for the speed limiter, which basically just means you can set it at a certain cap point and just toggle that on and off. Like if you know you're going into combat, you can pre-set up the combat speed, so you just push one button instead of messing about with a slider or moving a slider up and down. The acceleration limiter, I guess it could be useful in certain situations, so maybe good to have if you want to limit your thrust even more. Say you're around asteroids or something, that could be useful, especially if you're on digital inputs like keys or something like that. That could be pretty handy. Space brake, that's an absolute must. In the last episode I showed you how to, in-game settings, set this to use the boost whilst using space brake, which slows you down a lot faster, but it uses up your boost. There's a toggle for G-force safety to stop you blacking out. If you're doing a lot of dogfighting, maybe you would need that. Definitely not for starting off though. Cruise control, this basically locks in your current speed. If you're using twin sticks, this could be good. Say if you're having to push the stick forward for long journeys, just push it forward, click in cruise control and just, you can rest your arm. Landing system is your landing gear. Vtol is a vertical takeoff thruster, so if you're anywhere where that would be useful, like not in space, probably in atmosphere or in high gravity, a lot of the ships, quite a few of the ships actually, come with vertical takeoff thrusters. And it just gives you a lot more vertical thrust, basically, which makes controlling things a bit easier. I primarily use it if I'm mining on a planet's surface. It's good to use the vertical thrusters to move around and slow down. In terms of necessity though, it's not really necessary, it's good to have. Cycle configuration, this is if you have a ship which has fold out wings or something like that are on this separate bind. This is pretty new. I think the only thing that uses it so far is the Scorpius. But eventually you will be using this independent of the landing gear. A lot of the ships right now, you push the landing gear goes in and then the wings fold out. I think at some point they'll be separated and cycle configuration will work the folded wings. Request landing, although this isn't top priority, it's really handy to have. It requests docking for you and it requests takeoff for you. Flight system quantum travel, this engages the quantum drive, so the one up there turns on the system, this engages it. That's obviously tier 1. Flight docking, now there's a couple of ships that you can dock another ship in, and they are docked, not just on a landing pad. This system is for that. Not going to be used a lot, but I would make sure you've got something bound to this anyway, as it's going to come in handy if you're trying out the Merlin and trying to dock and undock from the Constellation, things like that. Okay, so there's this pin target thing. You can come into a situation where there's 3 or 4 targets and you can pin 1, 2 and 3 and then just use this to quickly flick between all the targets. Not necessary, so you can just look at a target and then lock selected target and then unlock selected target. And this does the same job in 2 binds. Switch lead lag reticle. This is basically a lead or lag reticle for your targeting system. You'll probably want to mess around with this and see what you find suits you best. It's definitely a preference thing, but I would put it in tier 3 for the moment at least, until you get heavy into the combat side of things. Then you might want to explore putting it as a permanent bind somewhere. These are for entering remote turrets. If you're in a computer controlled turret seat, you can flip between the stations by using these commands. Again, if that's something you're going to be doing, then obviously that's going to be a higher priority. Target cycling. I have one button here set to cycle through the hostiles surrounding my ship, and the same button as a double tap. You can do this by pressing Y and it resets to the closest ship. It's really up to you. Obviously you can select attackers instead, or friendlies is there as well. This is for selecting a sub-target, so a specific system within a ship. So not essential, but maybe tier 3 would be good to have. This is tier 2, not really necessary. You could always select them manually. Hail target does what it says on the tin, but I've never actually used it, and it basically calls another ship. Flight radar, activate ping, increase and decrease ping angle. Now activate ping is definitely a tier 1 top priority. Not only will it find targets and enemies and stuff, or interesting rocks that you might want to explore if you're mining, but right now there's no night vision in the game, so if you're on the dark side of a planet, this is your only friend, because it lights up the ground for a wee second, letting you see the shape of the terrain. So you're going to want this bound as a priority. Increase and decrease ping angle, this is very useful as well, but not as much. Mainly if you decrease the ping angle, you get further reach, if that makes sense. So you can confine it to just ping in front of your ship at 90 degrees or something, and it'll reach further. Also, if you're mining and you know there's a rock, you can decrease the ping angle to a very slim beam, and it will return more information to you at a further distance, if that makes sense. Activate scanning. This is related to the module at the top that activates the module. This activates the actual scan itself. And like I said, it's just for scanning for targets and rocks and things like that, and giving you more information. So this finds the ship, this tells you what the ship is. Vehicles, mining. Obviously this whole section is only going to be necessary if you're mining, so you can put that in whatever tier you like. Fire the mining laser, right, that one's pretty straightforward, that's a toggle. Switch mining laser, this will switch between the actual laser that breaks the rock and the beam that collects all the material that drops. Increase, decrease mining laser power, you're definitely going to need that if you're going to be mining. That is the mining laser power basically, and you're going to want to be adjusting that on the fly all the time in case the rock blows up, so this is very necessary. Activate mining modules 1, 2 and 3, these are obviously pretty necessary if you're mining as well. There's modules that you can install on the laser head, and they do different things like, you know, make things more stable or increase the power, etc, etc. Jettison cargo, that is necessary if you're going to be doing a specific type of mining called quantanium mining. It's quite a high risk, volatile cargo. If you're not going to get that back to the refinery in time, you're going to want to jettison that, because it will blow you up. That is why that jettison cargo is in the mining section. Turret movement, so this is for if you are manning the turret, either remotely or physically, and it's just pitching you off. You can toggle the ESP for finer control around the target. You can recenter the turret. You can gyro stabilize the turret. You can mess around with these. Recenter's kind of useful if you're getting a bit disorientated. And there's also a speed limiter there as well to help with tracking the target more accurately. All of these will come in at whatever priority tier you deem fit. If you're constantly on man turrets, then you know these are going to be more useful to you. Vehicle weapons, so fire weapon group 1, fire weapon group 2 and fire all. There's not really much to say there. If you have 2 different weapon types that you'd like to fire independently, you're going to need at least 2 binds here. If when you're firing your second group you don't mind if the first group's firing at the same time, you can use this fire weapon all, and it'll just fire both weapon groups. That's really as simple as that. Cycle fire mode can be useful if you would rather have a more sustained damage on a target. It stops your energy reserve in your weapons from depleting as fast because the firing is staggered. Vehicle missiles. Launch missile, cycle next missile type. So you can carry more than one missile type, you can carry different sizes of missiles. This cycles between them, this fires them. You can increase the number of missiles you want to fire at any one time, up to a maximum of 4, a minimum of 1. I'd say these are top priority, definitely. Bombs, there is a bomber in the game. Obviously, when you get around to getting a try of that, these are going to become pretty essential, and it does exactly what it says on the tin, increases the HUD range. Shields and countermeasures, this is launch a burst, so you tap one for a decoy, or you can hold it and you can launch a bunch, basically. Pretty essential stuff for avoiding incoming missiles. You can also deploy noise as well, and that'll let you escape your enemy's lock for a second or maybe 2. Weapons, power triangle. So more power to weapons, that'll mean your weapons recharge faster, engines recharge faster, your boost will recharge faster, shields will recharge faster. You increase it by tapping it, or it just goes to maximum if you hold it, or reset, you know, make everything equal again. Flight power, this is pretty useful for independently shutting down the systems in your ship. So if you need a minimal amount of binds, you're going to want, you know, toggle all. That'd just be one key. However, you might find yourself in situations where you're on a planet's surface and you want to power off your engines, but you want to keep your guns hot and your shields on, so it's up to you. Depends how many binds you've got to spare. Headlights, definitely going to need those, that's tier 1. The on-foot binds, that's just standard FPS stuff. You can set those up however you like, but basically the default binds for this work reasonably well. I've never changed any of them. EVA, so this is for when you're flying about in space. I've never changed any of these either, there's nothing that really needs explained. Ground vehicle, basically just set these to the exact same binds that you've used for flying. You do have an extra one of a horn, obviously, if you need to do a little beep beep. Respawn's kinda handy if you need to suicide. Enable head tracking perhaps. Push to talk proximity. Cycle through audio channels. All things that you might need to bind if you're going to be making much use of them. Advanced camera controls. These are pretty handy if you like taking screenshots and stuff. Before you go though, I'm going to show you how to set inversions for access and dead zones and things like that. So come to wherever your flight movement is. So say this, we'll change this. Strafe up and down. You need to check this. It says it's on input 2, okay? And then you come out here and you go to controls, and then you go to inversion settings, and you need to make sure down here in the bottom right that it's on HOTAS 2 for input 2, okay? Then you'd go here to inversion settings and flight, and then flight movement, and then find strafe up and down and change that there. That would invert that axis. Dead zones are in here as well, and you set that up the same way. You need to make sure this is set to the right device first. And I think that's everything. That should be enough to get you started in the game at least. Next time we're going to actually get into this game and play it. And I'm going to show you how to do some basic stuff like Takeoff, how to set your spawn point, where you can find missions and the like. Okay, thanks for watching. 07 guys.